Good afternoon. It is November 10th, 2024, and it's the 32nd Sunday in Ordinary Time. And this weekend, we're invited to reflect upon the story of the widow's mite. We all kind of know the story. It's the widow that puts in everything she has into the treasury. And Jesus points out that her faith, her trust in God is so much greater because she gave of her need, whereas many give from their abundance. And it is contrasted with the story of the prophet Elijah, where he goes to this village and he asks the woman for a meal, for water and a meal. And the woman is like, well, I'm about to prepare the last that I have, and then my son and I are going to die. And the prophet challenges her to have faith. And the jar of meal and the jug of oil never ran out. Same thing with the widow's mite, where she puts her total and complete trust in God. And it begs the question for the rest of us to ask ourselves, what's the value that we put on things? And here in Alberta, minimum wage is $15 an hour. Okay. So, all right, I make $15 an hour. I go to church on Sunday. I'm there for an hour. Maybe, I drove 45 minutes to church, or maybe I drove an hour to church, or maybe I drove 5 minutes. But let's say you gave 2 hours to God. That's $30. Is that the value of our relationship with God? And in the Old Testament, the prophet Elijah is talking about food. In the gospel, Jesus moves it to money because most of us think more in material things and money than we do in spiritual things. So he's making it very concrete, the monetary side of it. And so when we take a look at that, it's like, okay, so what is the value that we put on the relationship between a husband and a wife and a husband? Or parents and child, or children and their parents, or children and their grandparents? What is the value that we put on that relationship? Jesus suffered and died for our salvation. He gave his entire life so that you and I might have eternal life. But at the same time, there's that part where it's like, how do I value this? That's the value that Christ puts on it, but what's the value that I put on it? And yes, monetary numbers don't really do it justice. Well, they can't do it justice. But do I stop and think about it? Is my relationship with Jesus Christ priceless? Is a husband's relationship with a wife priceless? Is a wife's relationship with a husband priceless? Is the relationship between parents and children, is it priceless? Put it in a different way, many of us have a best friend, right? But we have best friends, and we have friends, and we have sort of friends, and we have acquaintances, and then we have just people we know. What's the value that we put on each one of those relationships? And one would assume that your best friend would have the greatest value for its relationship. Do we think in those terms? Do we recognize it? Because again, we go back to Christ. What is his value that he puts on? And the value that he puts on the relationship with you and I is his very life. It's very similar to, on a wedding day, one of the great traditions in our faith was that the bride would carry in a bouquet with a red rose in it, and the red rose symbolizing sacrificial love. The willingness of the husband to die for the wife and the wife to die for the husband. Are we willing to make that offering? We look around our world. There are people who die every day in our world for their faith. But most of us, we get up, we go to church, we can go to church, not go to church, and nobody's going to shoot us, nobody's going to burn us to death, and nobody's going to challenge us, right? We can walk in the church, not walk in the church. But the question is, what's the value that you and I put on that relationship? In baptism, we're promised eternal life. What's the value I put on that? Is it a priority in my life? And for most of us as materialistic people in our secular world today, our value revolves around money. Our priorities revolve around money. Where do I put my priorities? Look where the family spends its money. What is the priority in the family? Where does their time go? Right? It's not a hard one to figure out. But most of us earn a salary. Most of us, go to work every day. We get value for our money. Well, when I look at my relationship with Jesus, right, what am I giving back to God in the manner that God has gifted me? And do I hold it as something important? So I invite you, it's one of those things to reflect on. It's one of those things to take a step back on. Are you giving back to God in the manner that God is giving to you? What is the value you put on your relationship with Jesus Christ? Is it absolute? Is it priceless? Or is it something less than priceless? Does it need some work? Does it need some improvement? Does it need to be worked on? At the end of the day, the only person who can answer that question is each of us for ourselves. But I'm pretty sure that most of us need to do a little work on our relationship with Jesus Christ. And maybe we need to value that relationship with Jesus Christ and with our neighbor a little more greatly. It is November 10th, 2024, and it is the 32nd Sunday in Ordinary Time. May God continue to watch over you, protect you, guard you all the days of your life.